Wonderful.
And let's check in and then set a purpose and then see what we can create together.
My check-in is that I'm excited and delighted by this conversation and have been looking forward to it since I woke up this morning.
I'm also excited about what's going to happen, and I came from a pretty exhausting weekend with family, which is always, as family sometimes is, exhausting. Yeah.
I am really enjoying the way your daughter is hanging on you. Just there's something about exactly how she's doing it. Now it changed, but this one, just stay. that conveys trust in a way that is so nice to observe. Yeah. And I've been looking forward to this conversation for far longer than since I woke up. And I also have anxiety about not remembering exactly what my entry point into it was. And so what's going to happen? And all that is fine. And we have one more person who's joined us. Would you tell us who you are? You are area code 647.
It's Leonie.
Ah!
Hello.
Hi, Leonie.
Hi.
Would you check in?
Sure. I'm excited about having this conversation because it will help to bring me back into the spirit of being in Poland and to connect with some of the awesomeness and sense of spaciousness and opportunity that was there. So that's my check-in.
Wow.
Cool. All right, dear Sarah.
All right, dear Mickey.
So you have it written down. I already forgot, but you have written down the purpose.
Yeah. Discussion of emotion words and nonviolent communication, relational language and neuroscience, avoidance and interdependence.
Great.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have some thoughts to get us started?
Sure.
Can count on someone in this world.
My thoughts lately have been straying into needs as well. And one of the things that I've been working with is the research of a man named Jaak Panksepp, who was an Estonian who grew up in the United States and did his research here. His research was about mammals and how mammals have 7 different circuits that life energy runs on. And some of them are emotion circuits, so here's our emotion words, but some of them are motivation circuits that are not emotion circuits. So the seeking circuit, for example.
That's neat.
Yes. The seeking circuit is not an emotional circuit, and it has within it a capacity for predatory aggression, which in its purest form is hunting, but shows up in human interactions in ways that are not so pleasant. Experiences like contempt, or the movement into bullying, or the reactivity to a sense, a disgust reaction, a reactivity reaction to a sense that someone else is being weak. So there's this interesting thread through human relations that appears to be slightly devoid of a certain kind of emotion, of the richness of emotion that we think of with the grief circuit, with the anger circuit, with the fear circuit. That there are that there are kind of these swaths of emotion that connect us, and then that the seeking circuit in particular takes us out of relationship into objectification. So this is the area that I've been just deeply kind of grappling with and interested in and working with. So emotion words that sort of touch the seeking circuit would be words like curious, and if you add warmth to curiosity, of course, it becomes warmer. Or interest. I feel interested, There's intrigued. This sense of emotional. I think what this particular exploration helps me with is a bewilderment and a blankness that I have experienced with certain states of seeking that I haven't found a lot of connection in and have been bewildered by. Why is there no connection when somebody is sort of academically curious?
So I want to see that I understand, and in order to see that, I'm going to say different things from what you said.
Yes.
So the thing that is emerging from me is that these circuits are separate, which means that the seeking circuit is that the only one that is motivational and not emotional?
Sexuality also, in its sort of purest circuit form, doesn't have so much emotion connected to it, and care, interestingly enough, which has a lot of warmth connected to it, and then also play. So affection is with the care circuit, and then happiness is with the play circuit.
But happiness is an emotion, so now I'm confused because I thought you said that the motivational circuits are not emotional.
You can assign happiness, interestingly enough, is an emotion which appears in the left hemisphere.
Just a second. Kirsten, I want to turn off your video because the movement is very distracting for me. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So,
say that last thing again, I didn't hear.
The seeking circuit is basically the left hemisphere. The left hemisphere is run by dopamine. The seeking circuit is run by dopamine. The left hemisphere, when we close off the right hemisphere with electromagnets, or when people have split corpus callosum, the left hemisphere is not a relational place.
Mm-hmm.
It's a place that holds a couple of emotions. It holds the seeking circuit, and it holds approach-related anger, and it holds happiness. And we have to think about happiness in a particular way to understand it as a left hemisphere emotion. Delight really takes us into the right hemisphere, a sense of delight in another person's existence. We know that person exists. But if you think about the exuberance, the happiness that comes when, like with Tigger from Winnie the Pooh, or just like that, the bounciness where there's no relationality, somebody's just like aggressively happy, and they're, it's a broadcast state rather than any kind of interdependent state of connection. It can move into interdependence with the addition of care. It can move into interdependence with the addition of delight, of awe. These things awake in a relational state.
So I'm now getting more confused because it sounds like initially it sounded like you were making the significant distinction was between emotional and motivational circuits.
Yeah.
And now the distinction that you're making is more about left and right hemisphere.
I'm bringing them together. Yeah.
It sounds like all the motivational things are in the left hemisphere and some of the emotional things. So there are no motivational circuits in the right hemisphere?
The right hemisphere, that's not entirely true, because care, in a way, is a motivational circuit. I think this circuit information explains so much where nonviolent communication sort of gets a little fuzzy. Like, is love a feeling? Is love a need? I feel loving. Where does that come? That kind of essential wondering about different kinds of ways we use language to describe states of being. So I feel warm. I feel warm towards you. Is that a feeling? Is it a neurobiological state of connectedness?
This connects me with a distinction that I make. I don't study neuroscience.
Yeah.
I have, a very ambivalent relationship with it. It's like it's okay for as long as it preserves dignity.
Yeah.
As soon as it seems like it doesn't preserve dignity, it's just a reductive thing. Let's get rid of it.
Yes.
That's my ambivalence.
Yes.
I'm also very conscious that as a lefty, that lefties are more integrated between the hemispheres.
Yes.
And that's a significant thing in my sense of self, understanding that that's so for me. But the distinction that I'm making may or may not map into what you know about neuroscience. I divide needs into two categories. And I don't have words for it. I have only an energetic field. So the Leonie who doesn't see, I will need to find words. Maybe you can help me find them.
Sure.
Maybe I would say one set is protective needs. And the other set is moving towards life needs. And the protective needs include, obviously, safety, but it also includes respect. It also includes autonomy. And the moving towards life includes, needs like, anywhere from meaning to community, like I'm talking about large categories. Obviously connection. And I'm curious how that distinction maps into the distinction that you're making.
Yeah, it maps for me because there's research that shows that some needs words light up the left hemisphere and some needs words light up the right hemisphere. And I call these, I make this distinction also, and I call it instrumental and relational.
Okay. So I started saying something about this to you yesterday, but since the recording didn't happen yesterday, I want to repeat it, which is I am beginning to play with a sense that in certain states, not only are we not connected with our needs, we are also, even unconsciously, certain needs are just dead in certain situations, dead. And my social analysis is that we live way too much of the time collectively in those states because of what we have created in terms of institutions. And that frightens me because, like nonviolence, part of what makes it successful as a social movement, not as a personal, individual, interpersonal thing, part of what makes it successful is that it activates the care of another. If that other lives in a state where most of the time care is not part of the internal equation, or the circle of care is so enormously limited that it doesn't apply to most people, which is almost equivalent, then nonviolence is losing its core power.
I think I have to agree with you. I think we live in a very frightening world.
And I don't think it was like this even 40, 50 years ago. I think that patriarchy has been damaging from the get-go, but the damage, like all other functions that have started then, is an exponential function with a very small increment. So for a very long time, it was almost constant. And then, in the last 40, 50 years, all the things that matter have turned the hockey stick. You know what I'm talking about, the hockey stick?
Yeah.
And this is one of them, the extraordinary damage that patriarchy, you could say that patriarchy separates left hemisphere from right hemisphere.
I believe that's true.
Because I absolutely do not want to malign the left hemisphere. I just
No.
refuse, like staunchly refuse to do it. I mean, when people say, you're in your head, go to your heart, I find that too frightening.
Yeah.
It's the separation between things, the non-integrated state that patriarchy creates.
Yes, and I love it that you named the limitation of the circle of who matters.
Yeah.
When that circle is so small that it doesn't permit for a broader morality to be in place.
Yeah.
And wanting to bring into this conversation this beautiful and fascinating recent research that showed that if you took liberals and conservatives and you asked them social questions, of course, they answered very differently about how the answers to the social questions were very different. But if you took the conservatives and you had them imagine themselves into a world that felt safe to them, then their answers were identical.
Wow, this is monumental.
It is monumental. It is of monumental interest.
Aside from anything, could you send me the link?
Yeah.
Wow. And I also think that this, in that sense, that's a nice way to even say that the distinction between liberal and conservative is incidental.
Yes.
Every liberal can become a conservative in the right activation. And in fact, most liberals are conservatives in relation to conservatives. It's just that no one calls it that.
Yeah, because they're terrified of them.
Yeah.
And we see it in Hungary right now, where like even the liberal people right now, the government has created a fear state where there's a terrible fear that Hungarian society and culture will be destroyed by letting in Syrian immigrants, by letting in Muslims, by letting in Muslim immigrants. And there's a widespread support in Hungary for this recent passage of this law that makes it a criminal offense to aid a Syrian refugee. Passed last week. Yeah.
And so, it brings me back to one of my favorite little things that Marshall said, which is unacknowledged fear looks like aggression. Do you remember him saying that?
Yeah, I do. Absolutely. It reads as aggression. Yeah.
And so all the behaviors that people do that are incomprehensible in some ways can be traced to that.
Mm-hmm.
And there's another thing, maybe you can help me with that too, which is I find when I or others try to empathize with people, maybe not all others, that if I can find moving toward life need to be able to empathize with, it's easier to bridge the gap than if the need that I find is one of those protective needs.
Yes.
So it's harder to empathize when all you can come up with is a need for safety.
Yeah.
And I am wondering if we can replace that, like literally mechanically replace that need with another need, with a pair of two needs: basic well-being and trust, both of which are easier to bring, to create tenderness as a response than safety.
Yes, they're more relational.
When you know, when you try to empathize with somebody feeling unsafe, it's too easy to say, but they have no reason to be unsafe.
Right.
You know, there's no, everything is safe. What are you talking about? Whereas basic well-being and trust won't generate that objective arguing with the need in the way that safety would. And that objective arguing is what makes it harder to empathize. Yeah. This is all very cool.
Yeah. I have a sense of convergence.
Between what and what?
Between the work that I do and the way that I use language, and the work that you do and the way that you use language.
Yes. Yeah, it's kind of fun because I see that you are doing things on a very individual level, which I'm not saying that critically, I'm just one individual brain. And I think about things in kind of like historical, social, political, geopolitical, big frame. And it's kind of like interesting to think of it as making collective changes to brain. Because, you know, I think conversely of moments, the one that has most stuck with me is the moment when Anwar Sadat flew to Jerusalem and talked to the Knesset, the Israeli parliament. And suddenly, fear of each other on both sides dramatically diminished.
Wow.
And suddenly it was possible to talk about peace between Israel and Egypt. But it's an incredibly cold peace. Let's not get all carried away. But something changed the field. And then people's nervous systems adapted to that very quickly without having to do trauma release of war to millions of people. Do you see what I mean?
Yes.
Because you know me, I don't have any hope that we can offer individual trauma relief to enough people fast enough.
No, I don't think we can.
And, you know, in the other direction, you bring a new ruler to Hungary, to the US, and you change people's basic sense of well-being and trust, if I'm going to use those words.
Yes.
And suddenly they're willing to do things that ordinarily they wouldn't.
Right. It matters what the person who's the nominal head of the organization or the country or the business or the family does. It matters.
Yeah, and he himself, you know, I'm curious if we have a similar understanding of him.
Of Anwar Sadat, of Trump?
No, Donald Trump. My sense of him is that he doesn't actually have a sense of self, that there's a hole in the bag that's supposed to contain the sense of self, so everything that comes leaks instantly, and that he has no fundamental sense of well-being or trust in anything.
I would agree with you. The right hemisphere is the hemisphere that holds the sense of self. the felt sense of self, and it holds relational memory. And his incapacity to, one of the characteristics of people that have completely closed the door to the relational self is that they can't even remember what they said. There's no real timeline. There's no real time location. So almost everything that we see in this person's behavior comes from the complete disappearance of relationality.
So now connect for me fight, flight, freeze, and left hemisphere.
Sure. And this is the work of Stephen Porges, who's the man who has done the integrative study of the fight, flight, freeze, and also a state that he calls social engagement. So, and this is another interesting emotional piece that I've been working with. So the nervous system has 3 states of being. It has a state of being that's social engagement. It's where the heart rate is variable, the facial muscles are engaged, the eyes see human faces with ease, ears tighten to the sound range of human voices. There's an engagement in relationship that comes when people have a sense of this fundamental well-being and trust.
Mm-hmm.
And when this is so, then there's a movement into integration. We're able to take action, which is the left hemisphere is our action taker, and it's founded in the energy of our deepest needs. So an integrated movement into space. When our system gets alarmed, it moves into fight, flight. It moves into the fight, flight strip of being. Activation, elevated heart rate. We lose the fine muscle feed to the face. Eyes don't focus on human faces. Ears don't focus on human voices. We're listening for danger and watching for danger instead of being tuned to relationality. So in this experience of agitation, we make an almost complete left shift. Everything moves to strategy.
Mm-hmm.
When we move into fight flight, the whole system slips into strategy. This is one of the things I love, Mickey, about something you wrote recently. You said, I am letting go. And I have already let go a lot. I am letting go more than I ever have to outcome. Do you remember writing that?
Yeah.
This is directly speaking to the way in which when we let go of outcome, we move into the relational space. We move out of the seeking circuit.
Mm-hmm.
When we're in an outcome invested place, we want to move into this, we're moving into the seeking circuit because we want that outcome, which takes us out of relationality, which is why for me it was so profound that you mentioned this movement more than ever before into releasing outcome.
Hang on a second. I think Kirsten wanted to ask something.
Okay.
And I just want to, from my perspective, I don't know how it is for you. I'm very happy for Kirsten and Leonie to participate.
Absolutely. Yes, Kirsten, do you have a question?
It's more something I wanted to add on the notion that when suddenly something changes the field, you were talking about the peace between Egypt and Israel. And currently, I don't know if you're okay for me adding this, because I'm currently reading a book written by Joanna Macy and Chris Johnstone. And I just found this so very curious, and I had a realization kind of, because she wrote of an experiment where people were asked to fill out a survey, and then they had smoke come into the room. And when people were alone, they very quickly acted and went outside, searched for help or anything. But if not, if they were there with other people filling out this survey, they first looked for what other people are doing. Mm-hmm. And what I got from this is that when we see other people acting, we act as well. If we don't see other people acting, we don't act. So by individuals acting, if this crosses a certain threshold, even in a local bubble, then it can emerge very, very quickly. And this can go quickly, so exponentially that it changes behavior of people.
Yeah.
pretty instantaneous. So that was just like something that clicked for me that I found very, very interesting.
That it speaks, I think, to how essentially social we are. Thank you.
Yeah. And it also reminds me that my growing sense is that in intact indigenous cultures that are very relational, there is also a highly developed sense of individual, an individual self-trust and self-autonomy. That the whole structure that posits one against the other is completely flawed. That already is from within the world of separation, in which being with others is at cost to self, and following self is at cost to relationships. Yeah. And I now forgot what you were saying because I had a question to it.
Sure, go ahead. I remember where I was, so no worries.
But I don't remember the question. If you say where you were.
I'll come back to where I am. Yeah, sure. So here we are. We have social engagement, where those relational needs.
Yeah.
What you called them, something else.
I think relational is a subcategory of what I'm talking about.
Life-serving.
I don't like that language, but moving towards life. I think of them.
Okay.
Because meaning is not necessarily relational, but it is in that category.
For me, meaning is profoundly relational.
So I think for you, the word relational expands its meaning, and that's fine.
So in that top swath of being in social engagement, there's a lot of moving towards life.
Yeah.
Then we get down to fight flight, and there's this.
I know what I wanted to say now, which is in my own investigation of the spirituality of NVC, what is unique about the spirituality of NVC as compared to other forms of spirituality? For me, I think you may have heard this. I call it wanting fully without attachment. So it's an integrated state.
Yeah.
So there's something about saying that, letting go of outcome is I'm no longer in the seeking circuit doesn't feel true to me. For me, it's an integration of the seeking circuit with care.
With care, yeah.
With humility, with other states that allows me to be as fully passionate about what matters to me without being in that locked thing of it has to be this way. So that I was just advocating for
integration.
Yeah, non-malign. It's kind of like the seeking without an unintegrated seeking circuit is the danger, not the seeking circuit itself.
Yes, very true. Very true, and quite beautiful, or needs for beauty for me. So let me finish here, because there's something else that I've been exploring with this concept that I think is hugely important and speaks to both of our concern about the Western world. And then the final swath of experience is when people give up hope and they move into immobilization. So that's been traditionally called freeze, but Stephen Porges calls that swath of experience immobilization, in part because freeze gives you the sense of tonic immobility, where immobilization can be a collapsed immobilization, a limp immobilization. And so there's more complexity in the word immobilization than in the word freeze, in a way. So we have these three ways that our nervous state is in relationship to life, in relationship to others. And so what we see with the conservatives, if we're taking seriously this fear research, is that they are in flight, that they are in the fear response, and they're stuck in a swath of experience which doesn't allow them full expression of their inner being. And then we have
except when they are in the context of their own community, their own family, their own something, where it's within the circle of care. And so in that sense, I just want to take aside that binary distinction of conservative and liberal. I don't like it.
Yeah.
I think that it's a feature of modern living that many of us, much of the time, live in that swath.
Yes, absolutely. What I want to do is I want to complexify fight flight a little bit, and I've been working with this. I want to shift it into to add the fear of abandonment, which gets there's a whole mammalian circuit that's devoted to the panic that comes when somebody that we love disappears. It's what little baby mammals do when their mother disappears and they start to cry for her. But that whole circuit carries our sadness and our grief. And we're ellipsing an entire swath of agitated grief. It doesn't even appear in our English vocabulary. And then the closest we can get is abandonment. I feel abandoned. But then that is in nonviolent communication, we're told that that's a faux need, that's not a true need, because it's implying that
a true feeling, you mean?
Oh, sorry, feeling. Because we're told that it's a faux feeling because we're implying that somebody else has done something to us and no one can do anything else.
Oh, this is so cool.
Yes, this is the heart of our intention, I think, for this conversation.
And so I want to bring in a body of reading that I've done that I think you haven't yet, from Umberto Maturana. I told you about this book, The Origins of Humanness in the
Yes, I have it on my reading list, yes.
The briefest thing from there that is relevant to this is it says that mammals have two modes, a mode of love and a mode of dominance and submission. And the mode of love is mostly, mothers and their offspring, and the mode of dominance and submission is mostly adults. And that humans have evolved separately into the biology of love, in which a very known biological process called neoteny, which is the extension of childhood or youth. So it is known in biology that our features are more similar to baby chimpanzees than to adult chimpanzees, even as adults. So we clearly have extended childhood, but it's more than just how long it takes to mature. It's that we remain in a certain way in childhood our whole life. And specifically, it means that we need love. We can do dominance and submission because we hadn't yet lost that genetic possibility. And it also probably doesn't make sense to lose it because in certain contexts, it is pro-survival. But it wasn't anymore our dominant way of being. And we remain in need of love, in need of that social affirmation for our entire life. So being in the mode of dominance and submission makes us sick physiologically.
Yeah.
And so you can say that part of the malaise, I just haven't quite articulated until you brought this thing about the fear of abandonment, is that we put ourselves into a fight, flight, freeze state through the narratives and the institutions that we have, in which dominance and submission make sense. But it doesn't make our need for love go away. So it gets fed into the fight, flight. That's what you're telling me now.
What I'm telling you,
that fear of abandonment is the need for love coming into the agitated state.
Except it's not just humans. I want to expand this a little bit because it's true for the sea animals that travel in packs, flocks, fleets. What are sea animals? What of dolphins? Pods. And And then it's true for elephants. It's true for dogs within families, you know, that even dogs that aren't physically related to one another, they become attached to one another. Cats become attached to one another. Yeah, there's whatever the social grouping is, the mammals in it have the same capacity to that they have the need for the warmth and for the love. It's not just humans. That's a speciesism that hurts my body.
Okay.
Yeah. And I'm just going to breathe for a little minute. Yeah. So, indeed, the need for love is in that swath of agitation, and we don't. And what I wanted to say there is that we have so few words that capture it. That even when we talk about fight, flight, freeze, we're implying that it's anger and fear. We're not even making room for the panic of loss. In our language, it just shows up everywhere, that we ellipse grief as a panic state entirely. The only place it's allowed to show up in our society is down in the freeze swath. You know, I mean, wailing grief and expressions of broken heart that are agitated and loud are so unheard.
I'm once again wondering what it is when we are integrated. You know, what does it mean to get into a fight flight swath without losing relationality?
Yeah.
And that's what, you know, females do tend and befriend.
Tend and befriend is the top one.
But under conditions of immense stress, they still will do it.
Yes. And we'd have to look at their physiology to see if they were actually being knocked out of social engagement. Their physiological changes. I think they've learned an adaptive accommodation to be able to utilize the swath of social engagement, in part because of the emphasis in our culture and in the West on women doing the emotional labor.
I'm talking about animals. From what I read, it's the females, they can't fight prey, and they can't flee and leave the young behind. So they do something together collectively.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't remember the details, but it's specifically it is physiological, evolutionary. It's not learned behavior from socialization. It's about care. It's exactly when the care cannot be turned off, then even under conditions of immense stress, you will neither fight nor flee, nor collapse. You will do something because the care compels you to.
Yes, but even in animals, the attachment and the original relationship with the mother makes a difference to whether or not those little ones can grow up to tend and befriend. If they're separated from their mothers and don't get the attachment relationship in place, then they don't know. Then they'll grow up and they won't be able to affiliate in order to create these groups. So it's not purely evolutionary.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's like it's evolutionary and epigenetic.
Yes, it's built upon actual lived experience of receiving care and of it being in relationship. But the neoteny, did I say the word right? Neoteny is, of course, hugely important in humans. That's hugely important because then we have this longer childhood where the human brain doesn't fully myelinate until age 28. So we're integrating others' relationships with us all the way until we're 28, and then as we move in, there's much the social affiliative behavior, is entirely dependent on what we've been able to experience as little ones.
So here is unorthodoxy.
Mm-hmm.
So we are saying, and I believe it's true, that whatever happens, we make meaning of it, and that is what generates the feelings.
Whatever happens, we make meaning of it, and that is what generates the feelings.
It's not like what happens causes the feelings.
No, what happens causes body sensations.
But even that based on the meaning that we make of what happens.
Our meaning comes about 14 milliseconds after our body. Our body has a response within 3.03 milliseconds.
And I would submit without knowing, I have a lot of hubris in certain areas, that there's meaning making that happens even within that. And even meaning making to evaluate danger or not danger.
I wonder if we're touching on the wonderful teaching story that Marshall used, where he said, you've been hit hard from behind. You're angry. You turn around and you see that you've just stopped a child from running their bike under a bus. Is this kind of the area of consideration that we're in?
Possibly. Possibly. What my understanding is that there are only 3 types of danger that are innate. That we recognize innately, directly, without any learning or frame of reference or anything. And that's falling, sudden loud voices and creepy crawly. Everything else, we need to learn that it is dangerous.
So, for example, if we've been raised in a world where there is no physical violence, and we're hit by a child from behind with a bike, we're going to go, what's wrong? We're not going to go, I'm pissed off that I'm being hit, because we've never been hit in violence. So
something like this.
Is part of the meaning.
Yeah. My personal understanding of trauma is that it leaves interpretive frames in the brain that are likely to interpret things like what happened as danger.
Yeah, yeah.
And so that's how you see that the same activity generates danger in one person and not in another.
Mm-hmm.
Even though it is, before we are conscious, it happens unconsciously and quickly, but it's still a layer of interpretation.
Yes.
I was going somewhere with it. I know where. And I have a sense that we have conflated that reality with the unorthodox part, which is, I don't think that everything comes just from our needs, that there is a relational field that, however I read the relational field, it will create feelings in me. Because it's almost like the need lives not in me, it lives between us.
As you're speaking, let me check this. I'm getting an image of patriarchy coming down with its narratives and creating, like, it's already a traumatized field that's coming down on us, and it's bringing these narratives of interpretation.
Yeah.
That have so many layers of pain.
Yes, that is the first part, the interpretive thing. But but the thing that I was saying about the need is it's a brand new thought, and I don't even.
You said
To say I'm abandoned and then to say that's not a feeling. I understand one part of why it's not a feeling is because it involves an interpretation. But
it's like we've got multiple layers here. I need a different word besides abandoned, which is something like my nervous system is noticing that somebody who's very dear to me is gone, and it is an alarm state.
Yes, I understand that. I am literally focusing on the word abandoned.
Okay.
Because when we say it, I mean, I no longer say it. In other words, my actual deep internal consciousness has shifted to where that it's not like it comes up and I need to translate it. It doesn't come up. Humiliated still comes up for me. Humiliation still comes up for me as the actual experience that I am struggling to translate into other words or not. But so we can stick with abandon. That abandoned implies something done to me. And there is a way in which it's true. I am interpreting it as done to me. But once that interpretation is there, it is from the outside in. I don't know how to finish those sentences. My words are not conveying what I'm trying to say.
I wonder if we're touching a distinction. I mean, it seems that we are touching a distinction between the sharp pain of loss and our nervous systems like being in an alarm state because of the loss. And the implication, so that just tracking with you a little bit, that in the word abandoned, there's an implication that someone has done something to you. You've given up the use of this word entirely because you see with such clarity, let me check this, you see with such clarity that nobody is intending harm, that the intention for harm, that the intention to leave is not there, that when leaving happens, it's tragic, but not that there's no aspect of intentionality. Yet the language, if we use that language, it retains an implication that someone is intending harm. Am I tracking with you a little bit?
And yet there is a different aspect, which is that I'm responding to something that is happening in the field between us, not just within me. It's happening in the field between us. And so it makes sense to look for a word that acknowledges the in between us, not just the within me. And the word abandon does that. It does that at high cost of bringing in that whole interpretive frame. But if you get rid of the word abandon, then I can see why you would be at a loss to find a word, because there's a whole dimension. It's like we need to invent new words.
Exactly. We need to invent new words for this swath of experience of, but also wanting to come back to something you hinted at, but we didn't fully blossom out into, which is that grief, when you look at grief in an integrated indigenous society, what you see is grieving in community. You see that shared mourning. You see people yelling and holding each other and shaking together. You know, something we don't get to do.
Yeah.
And that's so integrated. It's not that fight or flight anymore.
Yeah.
It's social engagement because we're doing it together.
It happens sometimes in NVC workshops.
Yeah.
That somebody gets into deep mourning and it becomes a collective experience.
Yeah, it does. And then of course, the grief. I can't remember ever how to say the person's name. Maldome Sameh or something does grief workshops to teach about indigenous African. I don't know if the word indigenous works with Africa. To teach these community grief rituals so that people can begin to experience it.
Yeah. Yeah, and it helps me understand sometimes when I work with individuals to get in touch with grief, I instinctively developed this of where I ask them to make sound. And then if they can't make sound, I make it for them. And that helps.
Yeah.
So that is exactly there in that social engagement relational field.
Yeah, exactly there. Interestingly enough, it's really helpful with fear too. If somebody's holding fear and rage, and we do the sounds with them, it'll often move stuff that's deeply stuck. So there's something with all of these emotions that when we get to move it into the community and accompany one another, something very different happens.
And yet the way that we have trained ourselves to do empathy, almost it's coded with a northern cold approach.
Yep. I've had certification candidates tell me that they were told that they were feeling too much with the person that they were giving empathy for, that they were displaying too much emotion themselves, and that they needed to be back away from the emotion.
Wow.
Yeah.
And because I come from one of those cultures, it's kind of it straddles. It's in some respects it's a global North culture, and in some respects it's totally not. When people give me empathy in that kind of cold way, it just doesn't register. It's like, yeah, you're saying the right words, but where are you? What's in your heart?
Yeah.
And I remember Marshall very, very, very intensely saying again and again and again, you don't feel anything, you're empty. And I read research about empathy years ago that suggests that what we do when we offer empathy is really rapidly go back and forth between focusing on the other person and focusing on ourselves. Like many times a second.
There's an accompaniment.
Yeah.
I always have the sense that if I'm tearing up, or if I can feel it in my body, then I'm actually in my right hemisphere, instead of just that I'm actually in an integrated space, instead of shifted out of my body into something clinical. Yeah.
So this is about the time that we have scheduled, and I wanted to just open it up to see if Leonie or Kirsten wanted to say or ask anything, and then maybe move towards closing.
Wonderful.
How was that? How was this for you?
For me, it was very satisfying.
Cool. Okay.
How was it for you?
Very rich, and it's kind of like, are you kidding? We're done? No. Yeah. Kirsten, Leonie, anything? Any questions or comments?
Comments, maybe. I also found it very rich and very interesting. I took so many notes because there were so many things I found so interesting. We talked a lot about this area of pseudo feelings, they're called in NVC language, for example, abandoned. But there are other ones too, probably, that. And sometimes people do have this feeling, but I do feel this way, and so I thought this is just a very, very interesting topic, and maybe we really do need new vocabulary. And also in the end, this cold empathy really registered with me, because I noticed that many people, that oftentimes it's said to be only pure if you're not involved in a way, not displaying any emotion yourself, but very calm and clinical, as you said. And for me, it's on the one hand, I'm not very good at doing this kind of empathy. I usually get involved in a way, not like I'm affected. It doesn't, but I do feel something,
Yes.
And it doesn't register sometimes with me if people do it very cold. But
Thank you. I just before you go, Leonie, Kirsten, what you just said reminded me that it's the same as morality. That, the Kantian morality basically says if you have feelings, you are not actually taking moral action. Moral action is moral only when you do it out of duty.
Mm-hmm.
It's a direct quote that I have somewhere. Exactly those kinds of words. Yeah, thank you, Kirsten.
Mm-hmm.
Sarah, anything you want to add to Kirsten?
Appreciation to hear what was happening to you, Kirsten. Very grateful to know.
And Leonie, anything you want to?
Just want to express gratitude and also to say that the part that I'm thinking about is that idea of the space in between.
Mm-hmm.
And if it has to do with kind of like those unsaid agreements that come in relationships.
Yeah.
So like your mother is your mother, and there's the kind of marketed idea of what a mother is, but there's also some kind of understanding within your body of what a mother should be. And is it like the breaking of that agreement when someone, say for example, if she is to leave you? I'm just finding myself really curious about that piece. So just wanted to express gratitude, and this was really rich for me.
Thank you.
Thank you, Leonie.
If I may add another thing that was also very interesting for me.
Mm-hmm.
The conversation about liberals and conservatives, and actually that conservatives answered the same way as liberals did when they imagined a safe environment. There was so interesting, just that this distinction between liberals and conservatives is not really fitting, because I've wondered all this time also how can we help so-called conservatives become more liberal in a way and be open to new ideas and changing things and opening up in a way.
I like the idea of just letting go of those distinctions and talk about people's beliefs when they are afraid and people's beliefs when they're not, and what are the conditions that make people more or less afraid, and that changes it from ideological to practical.
It does. It's a lovely shift.
Okay. So anything you want to say before we close? Or here?
Just absolute love to be in the world with you, Mickey.
It makes it easier for me on certain days to walk through the world, to remember our connection and the warmth that you bring to the world in general and to me in particular.
Thank you.
Thank you. I hope I could interest you down the line in doing something like this again.
Always.
All right.
Okay.
Bye, everyone.
Bye for now.
Bye-bye.